All right, pre-production. Um, phase 2. Okay, so this is where we'll start to get a little bit. I started to talk about this. How do you figure out your sound? Well, here it's in the name. How do you figure out your sound? It comes from action and from recording, and that's why I think it's so important. It's just reiterating what the question we were just talking about. It's prepare. It's being prepared. It's doing your homework. Thing is if you haven't demoed your song in a way or have an idea of where you stand and you invite a musician in to come and help you, what if that musician thinks that you should change the key of the song? And their feeling maybe based on the way the song feels to them, the way they think that they can fit into it, and it's a sort of this outside influence. And if you haven't done the work to prepare to be able to answer the question, then you might get led down the wrong path. Not because anybody's being divisive, they're trying to be helpful, but you don't know where you stand. But if you've already done a little bit of research and you've done the work, you could say, okay, let's consider it. You'll have a sense of whether it works for you or not, and you can move with it. You can go with the suggestion, or say, well, I'm glad we tried that, because honestly there is no bad idea in the studio. There is no bad idea in the studio. It's always, it's almost always worth at least talking about something. Maybe you don't actually put it into action, but it's always worth considering it, because oftentimes it makes you think about other possibilities. And you can try something and you realize, well, this is not working. I like the way this is feeling, but like doing this on this instrument in this way is not working. Let's change the instrument. Let's change the melody of it a little bit. Let's change the approach. Okay. So it really is up to you to figure out your sound. Next point is, it's much like figuring out what your fashion sense is. You need to try on. You need to try stuff on. You need to. Do I feel comfortable? Maybe that look is something that I think would look good on me. And maybe it looks okay, but maybe you're not comfortable in it. The thing is if you can't be comfortable wearing something, well, then you're not going to be your true self. It's just like when I put a suit on. I mean, I love dressing up and put a suit on, but sometimes my wife will tell me, it's just like, you look too stiff. Well, I feel kind of stiff in a suit. I'm not used to wearing it, and I feel, it just doesn't feel like me, and so I behave differently. And the thing is, it's like the example here is like, yellow doesn't look good on everyone. That's true, for tons and tons of reasons. So you just kind of you need to do this work to figure some stuff out. It takes time. We talked about some of these artists before. It takes time. How many songs can you name off of some of these artists' first records? I mean, I'm sure some of you can, because you're fans, or, you just have that kind of knowledge. But if you just think about popular artists, it's, oftentimes it's not their first effort that made them famous. They had to build up. They had to sort of discover who they were. And maybe their first version of them was really good, but that second or third version on that third record, they really came into something that was even more powerful. And it really sort of defined them, So it's important to take this journey, to do the work as part of the planning stage spills over into the pre-production stage. Don't be discouraged if you miss the mark. That's the purpose of doing the work along the way. And this is a repeat. You're going to hear this again from me over and over again. We're going to do work. We're going to be able to evaluate it. We're going to contextualize it and reflect on it. I have the experience of 30 years or more of being in the studio, making records with lots of different artists, and seeing our successes and our failures, what they like and what they don't like. Listen, I've recorded songs with artists, and we'll get to the end of a recording day, and I'll feel like that we really worked hard, put in a lot of effort, and I thought what we had was a really great version of the song. I was very satisfied. I felt like we had done our job, and the artist has been like, I'm just not convinced. I'm not feeling it. It's up to me to be able to say, well, okay, how do we redo that? And it's not me. I can't get mad at them. It's their art. It's like, do I get discouraged and do I push back sometimes? Well, of course, because I have to stand my ground. I have to think that I'm correct. But in the end, it's their art, so I have to go with them. If the planning phase was like a script for a film, pre-production, it's like if the planning phase is like writing the script, okay, like you writing the song and kind of getting an early document of it. Pre-production of it is like, in terms of how it relates to film, is like creating the storyboard. It's like how we lay it out and build the foundation so that we can demonstrate it to others and start to build even more vision for it so that it can be followed. And the only way you can kind of really get to taking what the script is or the idea is to the storyboard is you got to create context. You got to have these ideas. You have to sequence things. It's the storyboard. You may start with the idea of a song with a riff that ends up being the bridge of the song, or you start with the chorus, you start with the verse. It's like you may put a song together in like a very haphazard fashion. Pre-production is about like getting it into a logical order, creating your storyboard. And then will help you understand what you need to know, what instruments are going to do what, and pacing. That's where you can start to, that's where when you're creating your storyboard, your pre-production, that's where, like there was a question earlier, it's like once you get those songs documented and you start creating your storyboard, then this is when you can start, we're still planning, but it's pre-production, Figure out as much as you can before you go into the production phase. Production phase meaning like the recording, get it stuff. Don't leave it all to just figure it out in the studio. You will be overwhelmed. You will be overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed. I was nervous showing up today at my own studio, place I am every day. Of course I have a little anxiety because I can't see you, but I know you're all out there, and I know that you're here, and I'm honored that you're here because you have expectations. You want to learn something. I don't think you're going to be mad at me like if you don't learn everything that you possibly dreamed of, but you have expectations. I want to do a good job. I want to be prepared for you. I want to deliver for you. That gives me anxiety. It's totally natural. But because I've prepared and I've thought a lot about this, and I have things that I can look at and refer to, hopefully I can stay on track and give you some good stuff. When you get to the pre-production stage, this is where you're going to start to try to commit to the structure, tempo, and key of the song. And if you haven't already begun to think about that stuff in the planning stage, and done a little bit of the work, well, you're going to have a harder time feeling fully committed to the idea that this is what I'm doing. I'm not saying you can't change it in the recording phase. You can even change it in the mixing phase if you want. You could be in the mixing. We could get to mixing and be working and realize, man, it's just not really feeling right. It's not all here. And here's a little story for you. The record I won Record of the Year for, Use Somebody by Kings of Leon. I kept telling the guys, I kept saying, it's just like, I think we need a keyboard part. I think we need another keyboard part for the bridge. And I kept saying it, and I don't know, for whatever reason, it just never happened. And I was mixing the song, and here I am on my own in my basement studio. At the time, I had a little basement studio, and I'm just mixing the song on my own, and I'm like, I just get to the bridge of the song, like I still feel like I need that keyboard sound. So I just plugged in a keyboard and I figured it out. I did it myself. So just that little aside is just to say that it's not done until it's done. But we're better off trying to do as much work ahead of time and planning and getting stuff down and moving forward. Getting that stuff down will inform us as we build our storyboard and turn our storyboard into that first day of filming, that first day of recording. It says don't go over 4 minutes if you want radio play. That's mostly true, unfortunately. I'm making a record that has several songs that are over 4 minutes, but myself and the artist, we don't think that's out of the realm of possibility to have the song be on the radio. But that format doesn't really accommodate songs that are that long. They got too many commercials they want to run. If it's just Spotify, I mean, you gotta have a dedicated listener. There's skip rates. There's all kinds of things to talk about and think about. It's like, does it get to the chorus soon enough? 45 seconds to a minute to get to the chorus of a song is sort of like, that's the dogma of what a successful radio-ready song is. Of course, you can break the rules. Things break the mold. Things get through. If it's powerful enough, if a song is powerful enough, it will see the light of day. But it's got a lot of hurdles, and don't build too many hurdles into it by ignoring some of these key things. Are there too many verses in your song? Can you trim some things out? Is absolutely everything as important as you think it is? I make records sometimes where we complete a song, and it's not until it's totally done that then we think about, like, well, where can we trim some of the fat? Maybe we're going to put the 4.5 minute version on the album, but if we want to get something on the radio, if there's the idea that, hey, we want to get this to the radio, it's just like, well, where do we cut it down? Does the solo need to be 8 bars? Can the solo be 4 bars? Can the bridge be shorter? Is the intro too long? I mean, it's better if you try to do these things as you go, but it's not something that you can't do later. But it is important. This goes to, like, what kind of artist do you want to be? If you just want to go perform your songs live and sell CDs or sell thumb drives or direct people to your Spotify, and that's all you're really interested in at the time being, that's fine to have songs that don't conform to this, but you definitely need to consider it. You need to leave some breathing room in your song. I know I'm talking like I'm saying, be concise, be, bang, bang, bang. It's not necessarily about that. It's about engagement. It's about dynamic. It's about, does this have a feeling of engagement and continuing to build interest? And do I want to continue to listen? Do I get distracted? Do I start thinking about something else while this is going by? But you also need to leave some breathing room in your song. If you don't want to have just back-to-back lyrics. You want the listener to have a moment of reflection about maybe what it is you're singing. You want to contextualize it. You want to have a vibe in there too. That's a very important part of music. I would say that the rhythmic vibe and feeling of a song is often the most important thing. And I would say that melody is maybe tied and sometimes wins close second. And then lyrics are kind of just barely in third, but you need some breathing room. You need to experiment with short instrument. Like an example is experiment with a short instrumental section before the second verse. So you might have an introduction, a verse, a chorus, or a melodic hook in pop music. Sometimes sometimes the chorus in a pop song is not necessarily a full-on lyric. And then let's just have a little bit of you can bring the intro back after the first chorus before the first verse, or maybe you just have the beginning of the beginning of the second verse, but without the lyric. Maybe you just kind of go through the chords, a couple of the chords, and then start the progression with the lyric. Maybe you want to have an instrumental solo or hook before the bridge. Just think about some breathing room and some other dimension for your song. Creating a killer song introduction. I think it's very important that a song have a strong beginning, especially in today's world. Unfortunately, what I hear from major labels is they are, and maybe major labels not your goal, and that's okay. I work with artists that are not on major labels, and they're very successful. They do things on their own, and I love that too. But that's a harder road. Well, they're both hard roads. But I'm just sharing with you that major labels, managers, publishers, they're all focused. Well, not all. There are some great ones that are just really smart, creative people that could make records. A lot of them couldn't make a record to save their life. And I don't mean that to be overly offensive. I just sort of feel like it's the reality. And what you will hear a lot of discussion, input, opinion about is research. Research on, when a major label thinks about signing an artist, what do? They look at them. They look online. They see how many plays you got on Spotify already. They're not there to develop you. They want to know that they kind of want you already to be developed, and paying attention to these things are important. You need to engage the listener right away. In many cases, it needs to be interesting. Even if it's a 10-minute song, you want somebody to feel encouraged to take the 10-minute journey with you. The example here is the chorus chords are used in the intro of that song "Use Somebody" by the Kings of Leon that I mentioned before, and that's all it is. It's the chorus progression with the background vocals. I can't think of the melody at the moment. The O vocals that sing over it, and it's a very compelling and engaging intro to the song, and the whole band is playing. It's really big, and then it gets to the verse, and the drums stop and it drops down, and it kind of empties out, and then the vocal comes into focus. And those O vocals are revisited later in the song. They become a layer, and they fit with the lead vocal melody. If you're starting a song with a lyric and no introduction, make sure the first line has a killer. It has to be killer, and it hooks the listener in. I mean, I can't think of an example right off the top of my head, but I mean, you understand what I'm saying. It needs to get someone's attention. It needs to be engaging. It needs to give somebody a feeling of, drawing them in, excitement, just making them pay attention, kind of perk their ear up. Don't make your introduction too long. One time through the progression is usually enough. 4 to 8 bars. Do not make an introduction that is 25 seconds. This is the thing. You might feel really good performing and listening and feeling that music and that vibe of your song, but that's just you. That you're living it. You're performing it. It's tied to you. It has importance to you. But that usually doesn't come across and engage people and make them hold on for a long time. And this, we've talked about the skip rate already. Most people kind of expect the chorus to come within the first minute. That's because that's kind of what the industry says. That's what research says. And there's a lot of music that's built that way. We've been conditioned to it. Listeners are conditioned. We are conditioned. I'm conditioned from all the records I've listened to of what I feel like is a good performance, what a compelling sound is. I go back and listen to the music that I used to listen to before I started making records. And now that I'm educated and experienced about what it is that I'm listening to, I can go back and listen to that stuff that I listened to when I was very young, and I realize it's like, wow, those records really informed my opinions and taste about the way that I make records, and it's totally subconscious. I never ever made a conscious effort to go back and copy that aesthetic or that sound. It just kind of becomes who you are and what you know. So we're kind of conditioned to what we listen to. Okay, so this is where we get into talking about our storyboard. This is where you start to create a more complete demo of your song. And I know we're in a hurry to get to the end. We want to know what the finished thing feels like. But you're on your own. You have so many jobs to do, so many things to learn that you need to have a proving ground. You need to build the song. You need to build your experience. You might be a very accomplished songwriter and be able to sing great. But you're going to make your own EP. So now you have to figure out how to become a record producer, an engineer, and a mixer, and maybe even a mastering engineer. And you have to guide yourself and others through it. So then you're out of your element. Or maybe you're really good at programmer or you know how to record really well, but you're you're not as strong of a songwriter. You know, it's like you got a lot of hats to wear. So we want to start to create a good demo to work off of, and so you know, we're right here. We're talking about easy drummer. Lay down a very basic beat. And it doesn't necessarily have to be drums. It can be, you can make loops out of organic things, rhythmic things. It doesn't even need to be percussion or drums. It could be, you could make a loop out of you know, like a guitar part or a little arpeggiated part. Anything really, but just kind of get some rhythm down. So we're just going to stick with the easy drummer thing. Get a very basic rhythmic representation of the feel of your song, because you are trying to figure out your sound. So you need to, this is you experimenting, and maybe your intention is to get somebody in that's a better programmer or a better drummer, or just a drummer. Maybe you don't play drums at all. You at least want to be able to demonstrate to them where your idea started and what you've been working to. And it's also like that reference point for you. And maybe the easy drummer part stays in there. Maybe it becomes the fabric of your record or your production, and you record a drummer, but you just add it to what the demo parts were. Maybe you replace them, maybe add it to it. There's all kinds of different things. David Gray's first record started out as demos, and they kept some of that stuff, and they just kind of built on it. And some of the very basic stuff that they're putting together to sort of get the song started ended up being in the record. I will talk you through production ways that you might combine things, or like how do you treat programmed drums and combining it with real drums, or how do you and have the programming be the focus with the live drums being something that accentuated, or the other way around. We will talk about that stuff. Record the other instruments you need, perhaps with the help of other musicians. Now, this is where the pre-production phase starts to sort of sound a lot like the recording phase. And you know, there's a big gray area, because once you start recording, you're recording. But do as much of the basic work as you can. Get that easy drummer part down there. Get your, you know, whatever your main instrument is. Maybe you're making electronic music, and you start with a beat, and then you kind of add some other keyboards or other elements to it, and then you sample some vocals, or you have a vocal part that you're putting in there. Kind of get those things started. Begin to understand. This is where you start to understand the instruments that you're going to need, and start to make the plans to enlist the help of others. Use reference songs. There was a question earlier about like genres, and yeah, get songs that are in the genre, or songs that you just like the feel of, and take notes using reference songs. I think for me, it's important to take notes about the songs that you like. Document the song structures. Make mental, and, you know, write down notes about what it is that you like about the song. Write down the structure of the song, and understand what makes that song structure work. How many bars are each section? Like, sort of dissect it a little bit. It says here, don't flip back and forth between a reference and your record. You don't want to sound like a copy. That's a very good point. Yeah, you do not want it. You're not trying to make your record sound like your reference. And your reference is not going to sound like your record. Even myself, as a professional record maker, I don't want to be flipping back and forth between what I think is an equivalent to the record I'm making and what I'm working on, because they're not the same thing. They can inform each other, but if I make the direct comparison sitting in front of my speakers, well, I mean, the way that other record was put together may not reflect the way I'm putting my record together. There may be a lot of very critical things to take away from it, like the structure, some of the instrumentation, the tempo. But especially when you're building a track and it's not a finished mix, you're going to feel like your song and your production is smaller and incomplete and inferior to this thing that has been professionally mixed and mastered and is loud and bright and all these things. It's okay to do a little bit of that referencing back and forth, but just be careful and even turn down the finished record so that it's not, kind of put it on a level playing field if you're going to make the comparison. I think it's better to take notes and listen to them sort of separately and make those evaluations, because that's how you learn to make those decisions for yourself and make those discernments. So yeah, make the notes. Sourcing and hiring musicians. This is still pre-production phase because you're creating your storyboard. Look up the credits for the songs you like on sites like allmusic.com or, this says try sites like soundbetter.com or airgigs.com. If you're looking to hire musicians, either to have them come to you in person or for you to go to if they're local to you, for you to go to their studio in person with your project, or you want to hire somebody in another part of the world. I mean, I have many friends that are professional studio musicians and tour musicians. They have little home studios too, just like pretty much all of us. And they do work, so you can send them a version of the early version of your song or the even the more advanced version of your song and get them to add something to it and then sort of send it back to you. But look at these resources online. Look at the musicians that are playing. Now, obviously, at a certain point, you're not going to be able to hire, you're not going to get John Mayer or Diplo to necessarily guest on your record. But identify things that are realistic, and maybe your favorite band has a musician that played on there that's not part of the band that help. Maybe they're accessible because that's how they make a living. Get in touch. See if you can hire them. Find out what their rates are. Be in touch. Get a quote. Go out and see live music in your area and approach the musicians after the performance. I mean, they may be in your local community. I mean, they may not live where you live, but if they're playing a small show that you go to of a couple hundred people, I mean, chances are you might get a chance to talk to them, and they might have a laptop in their van that they could help you with, or when they get back home, they can contribute to. You don't have to do it all on your own. So just be thinking about the local community you're in, where you can go see shows. Maybe you don't have access to that stuff, and maybe the internet is your only way to do it. Well, just find other collaborators in whatever way you can. Maybe you don't actually. Maybe you can find somebody that has a skill set that you don't have, and you have a skill set that they don't have. And you can collaborate on each other's music and barter that way, and you don't have to pay them. Maybe you can agree to work on each other's music and help each other out. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you take on working on more music than your own, but it's a possibility. And these are things to consider. This is still in pre-production, but this also applies to recording. Keep moving forward and commit to your ideas. Commit to sounds. Commit to ideas. Commit to performances. Don't overthink things at any one particular stage. This is another reason that I'm requesting of you and trying to reinforce the idea that do this in steps. Don't leave it. Don't try to do it all at one time. Keep moving forward. Commit to things, and try to create the sounds and record the sounds as best as you can for the idea that you have. Don't. I mean, we'll talk about this more in the recording phase of it, but just commit to ideas, because the thing is if if you put an effect on something when you record it, or you create a sound, be bold. Be bold and get it down and just do what feels inspiring, because it will be inspiring. It'll be fun. And the sound that the pieces, as you gather the pieces, chances are you're going to be doing this thing in segments. Most of you are not going to be assembling a group of people to execute the whole thing at one time. It's, you might get to that stage once you've done your homework and you know that that's what you want to do and need to do, and you've budgeted for it and planned for it. But going to a studio that can accommodate a number of people and has all the gear, and that you can hire somebody professionally, and it's got all the bells and whistles, it's expensive. You'll spend as much in a few days as you might on your whole studio. And then where will you be? You've got to be really sure that that's what you're going to do. You can always keep second guessing yourself all the way through the process. So try to just eliminate as much second guessing. Just commit to something and move forward. You can always go back and revise it, like I already pointed out later. You can add something. You can decide that once you've added some elements, that your early piano track or your early keyboard programming or acoustic guitar, whatever it is, you can revise it. You can redo it. But you've had that element there that from the beginning that has informed all the additions that you've made. And it may be that you just need to do it over again for a sonic reason, that the sound doesn't now quite fit with the bigger vision that you're creating, or that some of the rhythm that you had on, whatever the instrument might be, is sort of now being taken care of by another instrument, and you want to be sure that if that instrument is going to kind of take over some of that rhythm or some of that melody or some of that feel, well, then it might give your original idea can be a little simpler and be heard better and not be covered up. It's just like a progression of deciding what's important. But clarity comes from committing and moving forward. You can always adjust and come back. And I had this in my mind, and I mentioned it earlier. I reinforced the idea. Do the entire process with a cover song first to learn the ropes without the pressure. It doesn't need to be on your final EP. Okay, before we get to, well, just gonna make a note for myself. Just something I want to talk. I feel like we talked about the microphones, and I want to talk a little bit more about your studio setup and the bits and pieces that you might assemble. So, but just give me a second here. I just want to make a note, and maybe we should talk about it now because it is pre-production. I guess you can't really get. It is part of the planning and assembling and knowing what. Building your storyboard and knowing what it is you're going to need to execute your recording. Thing is all this is until you, even when you get to mixing, but until you get to mixing, it's all kind of anything can happen at any time. There isn't necessarily a rigid and strict way to go through the process. We're laying it out in a way that overall I think is the smart way to do it. But it's all jumbled up. It is really. I mean, you may not realize until you get pretty far down the path that you need to rewrite something, or you may get to the end of the storyboard phase and have had confidence in your song selection, and as you start to flush these things out, it's like you got these 5 songs and one of them is just not feeling as good as you feel like the other ones are starting to shape up to be, and the potential that they're indicating to you. Well, maybe you have to go back and take that. Maybe you have to sort of bench that song, as it were. Like, okay, well, this maybe will be a B-side. Maybe I won't finish this. Maybe I'll come back to it. I need to bring up another song into the fold that I think is actually now going to start to fit into this a little bit more in the pre-production phase. I want to talk about setting up your studio and what is essential. I kind of like. I'm just checking my notes here. Got 10 pages of notes. I got index cards all over the place. Yeah, we're gonna talk about this a little bit more, but I want to just, because we had the little statement in there about what to plan for, what's your budget. I think we need to talk about what your budget is going to be. We talked about the microphones. I showed you what different microphones you should have as a suggestion. Anything I say is just my opinion based on my experience. There are literally 1,000 ways to make a great record, and there are many successful and capable people out there. I'm very fortunate that I seem to be considered to be one of them. But by no means do I think that my word is the last word, or that I have all the answers. I still have a lot to learn. And I respect the opinions of other people, and I observe other people do things in a completely different way than I do, that has a result that I think is equally compelling or inspirational. I mean, and it's just like, wow, how did they do that? I don't understand how they put it together that way, because my mind doesn't work that way. I'm just giving you my opinion, and I'm very grateful that you're here to sort of go through this with me. So let's talk about you setting up your studio. Now, you guys are kind of all over the map, I'm sure, about what kind of music you're creating and how you're going to go about it, what instruments you play, don't play, how well you can sing, if you sing at all, so forth and so on. But everybody's going to need we're all going to need the same basic stuff. And I know I did talk a little bit about it, but so the microphones, and I will talk about techniques with those microphones, but you're going to need a few pair of headphones. For reasons of, if you want to get in the same room, if you want to have people over and you want to record as a group, well, you're going to need a few pair of headphones for everybody to hear what's going on without having the speakers playing. Maybe you can only afford one pair of speakers. That's okay. There are other ways to go out in the world and listen on other speakers. Go over to your friend's house and listen on their speakers. Even if they have the same speakers as you, that's a different room. It will give it different context. Having multiple pairs of headphones, if you have 3 pair of headphones, maybe 2 of them the same and 1 are different, so that you can compare on the 2 different types of headphones. Have enough microphone cables that you can hook up everything for your studio. Microphones. I think that the Universal Audio Apollo series, the Twin, all the way up to the X8P, which is the new one. I think those are great products. Now, I don't know that you can afford them, but those are great products because you can put plug-in emulations for different microphone pre's, different compressors as part of the record path. But you're going to need an interface for your DAW. And your budget is going to need to be at least a couple $1,000s. And I know I'm repeating some of the things I said before, but I want to make absolutely sure that we sort of have this equipment checklist, because I've helped a lot of people put studios together, and there's certain things they don't think about. They spend all their money on a microphone and a mic preamp, or a compressor, and they realize it's time to record, and they don't have enough cable to hook everything up. They don't have enough headphones for everybody. There's things that get overlooked when you start looking at the big prize, and you start thinking about, you get all this, you go to Vintage King or whatever, you get all lustful for gear. It's easy to spend a lot of money in the wrong places. So, the basic elements, it's essential that you have them, and that before you invite anybody over to your studio to record, hook it all up and make sure that it all works, and that the biggest recording scenario, this is part of pre-production, this is part of planning. The biggest recording scenario that you think you can handle in your space, well, set it up and make sure that it works, and you're knowledgeable about it before anybody shows up. Because if you have two people, like let's say you've got your demo of your voice and instrument demo down, and you find the bass player and the drummer that you want to hire to come over and put your rhythm tracks down. They come over, and if you haven't troubleshot or done this before and haven't set up, and you're trying to figure out how to hook things up, or why something isn't working, or you realize that you're 2 cables short, well, you're going to have to go to the store, or you're going to have to call a friend to get stuff to bring over, or it's just going to take you out of the process of interacting with the musicians and recording. Most of the sessions that we spent, I spent a lot of time preparing for today. Danny, my assistant, and I were here 3 hours before we went on the air with you, because we had lots of things to set up. We had a lot of things to consider. We troubleshot things. We did it here. We did it with Graham online. We had trial run-throughs. We made sure everything was good, because we don't want to be distracted from the job at hand. And I know I'm getting a little tangential, but make sure you have all these things that are required to work, and it's going to cost a few $1,000s maybe to get all that stuff, or maybe not. You can do it. Believe me, you can do it much cheaper. I think Graham has shown you that it can be done for hundreds of dollars, and that's totally fine and possible. It's just the less you have, the more you need to make of it. That the more you need to be creative, and the more it's going to challenge you. So eliminate all those questions. What was the other point I wanted to make? Sorry, I want to get to closing this up and get some question and answers. I just want to be sure that I'm very purposeful in not skipping anything. I'll talk about this a little bit more when we're in the recording phase, which is coming up next. But let's say you have an inexpensive interface. I'm not going to name names and poo-poo something, but if you have something that only costs a couple $100s, and it's got 1 mic pre or 2 mic pre's, and you haven't spent a lot of money on it, well, you got to be careful how you use it. You don't want to overload it. You don't want to, because the less you spend on something, the cheaper the electronics are. So you got to be careful about how you use it. You've got to spend some time to know your gear, to know that how hard you can push it, how much you can overload it, when it starts to sound bad. Those things are only learned by doing. You don't want to get yourself in a recording situation where you've spent the money to hire somebody to come in, and this is the moment, and you want to capture that magic, and then everything goes well, but maybe you sort of were doing something you weren't that knowledgeable about. And you in hindsight, you see where, oh wow, I was running my preamps too hard. I was clipping things too much. It's okay sometimes to clip things. I'm not saying it's bad to clip things, but then you realize it's like, well, I've got this great performance, and we did everything that I felt great about, but my sound quality is inferior. Eliminate those variables. Make sure you have all the gear and that you've budgeted for it, not just time-wise, but financially. So let's just talk about our checklist. And thank you for hanging with me here. Have you figured out the song structure, the tempo, key arrangement as much as you can? It's not set in stone, but it's definitely important. Are your songs commercially viable, if this is important to you? And we've talked about that. Do you have complete sounding demos for your song? Now, complete sounding demo, your work tape, your early recording might be enough. I recommend and prefer that you put forth the effort to create a storyboard. Take it another step further. Lay your foundation. And we're going to talk, when we're in the recording phase, we're going to talk a little bit about the pre-production recording. I'll refer back to it. Like I said, it's a bit all over the place in terms of the process. Pre-production and recording can kind of be happening at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. Have you sourced and made arrangements with the musicians you need for any any part of the recording phase.